Greetings ladies and mental gents, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of various stories from the internet. In this video, we'll be focusing on a story from the subreddit HFY, called Dead Humans Rising, written by Regal Legal Eagle, and the link to the original story will be down below. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. The Grasnet invasion of Earth had started out with a bang, literally. Their ships had jumped into orbit after sending scouting drones, and they wiped out the major cities in a massive blue plasma explosions. But what they'd expected to be nothing more than a simple mop-up operation in the weeks to follow now dragged on for 3 years. The humans were tenacious and simply didn't give up their planet without a fight. Some of the Grasnet High Command was even worried that the humans were starting to win. The humans hid away in the ruins of their old buildings, or out in the wild, overgrown forests, waging a guerrilla war with the invaders, whittling them down bit by bit as they refused to give up. In the swamps and the lands once known as Louisiana, the Grasnet had reports of a human known as a witch doctor who had been terrorizing the local Grasnet forces. Their soldiers spread rumors of humans rising out of the ground or fighting on despite having wounds, and High Command had dispatched 5 of their remaining commandos to seek this human out and stop these vicious attacks. It had taken a week of tracking, but they had finally found the creature's hideout. As the boat jumped up against the shore of the Grasnets jumped out onto the soggy ground, dragging their craft up from the swamp. The Grasnets were humanoids with dark grey chitin covering their bodies, their eyes white with black slits, and their 4-fingered hands clutching their pulse rifles close as they looked around the island that they had arrived on. It had once been a home to something that the humans called a amusement park. The equipment had rusted and worn, pieces having fallen off here and there, and they approached the gates they passed under the faded sign that said, "Welcome to Voodoo Land." There were strange effigies hanging from the sign, bundles of sticks and bones of small animals tied together with twine. They were scattered around the area, hanging from signs, rides, and stalls. It set them on edge, their neck spines standing on edge. The sky was grey as the sun set, and the misty white fog slowly rolling in over the islands as they walked deeper. Then one of their number, named Taz, pointed to another of these strange effigies. "Look!" The others followed his finger at the effigy that didn't sport any bones of small animals, but the skulls of a Grasnet. It was hanging from a strange round metal structure that had copies of various earth animals and strange poles rising up out of their backs. There were more within the structure, all decorated with bones and chitin structures of the Grasnets. Taz slowly approached it, reaching up with the intent of putting the first bundle down. But before he could do that, they were surprised as the structure sprang to life. The lights flashed on and started to spin as they all backed up warily. They heard some strange music fading and a scratchy pouring out of the speakers as the structure lazily spun around. The effigies clacking and bumping into one another as they moved. The lights all around them began to come to life as they formed a circle, weapons rising, but they couldn't find a target. They heard laughter, and twisted warped with the lack of maintenance and the speakers all around them. "It knows we're here," Jav muttered. They looked around, and then Yearn pointed to the massive dark structure near the center of the park. It was a mansion of some sort, black with age, looking old and decrepit. "There's something in that window." They looked and saw some white figure briefly in the dark window upstairs before it seemed to fade away. They began to advance, moving around, and spinning structure covered the remains of the dead kin. The structure had some strange metal tubing in front of it, set into lines of some sort, but they quickly hopped onto the low pieces and walked up the entrance. Just as they got close to the door, it slowly creaked open, and they raised their weapons cautiously. Nothing came out, and they slowly walked forward once more. Mrek wet his mandibles with a black tongue as they jumped forward through the door, weapons swinging left and right. Inside of this room of some sort, an ancient wooden furniture along the edges of the room, cobwebs dominating the corners as the little spiders scurried along them. Mrek waved his others forwards as Jav, Yearn, and Taz quickly moved inside, and Hearn moved backwards, watching the path behind them until he was inside. There was only one door leading on from this room, and they looked inside, seeing a large circular waiting area of some sort with a high ceiling covered in stained glass. There was a door on the far wall that was open. They stepped inside. But when the five were in the center, the doors behind them and in front of them slapped shut. Formed a circle, weapons raised yet again. Then they saw a flash of light in the bottom of the thunder coming from above. The lights dimmed for a moment as the evil voice cackled out of the partially busted speaker. You dare enter the mansion of the Madame Voodoo. Few enter, less survive. Taz quickly relaxed. This is a thing that humans used to have. It's just an attraction of sorts. The floor beneath him started to rumble as it began to drop down into the ground, inch by inch, while the recording blabbled on. We just need to walk through it and track down the human. This was likely a diversion. The others looked less sure. Then they looked up at something green swept through the air. Yearn fired off a few blue bolts that sailed through it, slamming into the wall as Taz knocked the gun down. It's a projection, you idiot. More of those green ghosts groaned and moaned as they flew over their heads. Then, rumbling, the platform stopped, and the newly revealed door opened. They walked through it, finding themselves in a series of hallways, winding and twisting in front of them. There were old wooden doors on either side, but as they tried to rattling the handles, they found them to be nothing more than decorations. The commando started to walk forward then, hearing the cry of some black bird as a robotic version of one sped along the tracks overhead. The click-clock of the old clock thudding against each corners as they walked. Halfway down the first hallway, though, they suddenly heard a roar and a snarl as a door that they were passing splintered, driven inward by some massive creature. They screamed and fired into the door, blue shots slamming into the door as it cracked and bulged out towards them. But then they panted and watched the center section that was cracked and splintered and drew back inwards, flat as it had been when they first approached. They were confused and then heard the same snarl and roar and fired more bolts into the door as the creature beyond. When it slowly flattened yet again, Yearn spoke. Wait! Stop firing! The others reloaded their energy packs and waited for the snarl and roar once more. When the door bulged, and this time he gripped the edge of it and tore it away. Behind it, they didn't find a fearsome creature, but a metallic hydraulic system that had been attached to the door. It's just a machine. The others grumbled and began to advance once more, but as they rounded the next corner, a furry giant beast that towered over them jumped out of the junction. They screamed once more and fired again, bolts slamming into the creature as they stripped away pieces of metal and fur to reveal more metal and wiring beneath. It pulled back into the junction after a few seconds, and Taz growled, Conserve ammo. They're just trying to scare us into wasting what we have. Save some for the real threats. Once more, they reloaded their energy packs and advanced. At the next junction, they stepped forward warily, and a door to the left opened as a dark-skinned human figure with a white skeleton painted on the front was a reveal of a war cry, his hands raised and threatening. Then a red creature with the black curled horns jumped out of the junction to their right. This time, the Grasnets didn't fire. They muttered and began to walk forward past the fake trap. Yet, as Hearn brought up the rear, the others didn't notice that the fake human suddenly jumped out, grabbing him and dragging him into the door, which slammed shut. They finally exited the halls, looking down the room, with the green and white projection sitting down and some fake dinner laid out before them. The recording prattled on about something, as the projections ate the fake food and seemed to choke and die before flying up into the air, making groaning and moaning noises. This is stupid, Taz muttered, and then glanced back, pausing for a moment. Where's Hearn? The others turned then, looking around as the 5 had become 4, and they rushed back to the last junction. And the red creature jumped out of the door, but the one with the human stayed closed. Yearn shoved against it, but the metal door didn't budge. They gulped, and raising their weapons as they realized that this had been a trap, not just a diversion. Advancing past the dining room, that they were walking down a hall, and they saw what looked like two giant cobwebs ahead of them. Mrek pulled out his knife free, and he walked forward, ready to clear the white webs out. But then the ground beneath them dropped away, and they gasped and cried, sliding down a metal half-tube. Giant spiders seemed to drop from the ceilings as they sped down the tube. They were revealed to be robotic, hovering just above them. As they slid down, Jav actually collided with one of these things, grunting out, but his eyes went wide as the thin wire, fastened into a loop, was jerked free of its place from its collision, and he fell down around his throat. He grunted and tried to slip his hands out from under the spider, but then he began to rise back up into the air. His eyes went wide as the loop tightened and the rise of the robotic spider, choking him. The other 3 had hit some padding on the floor and looked back to see the tube and see his legs kicking as their hands clutched the machine. Jav! Mech tried to climb back up, but the smooth metal slide gave him no purchase. They watched in horror as the spider raised all the way back up to the ceiling, and they could only see Jav's feet, kicking at the air until they finally stopped, his gagging and choking reaching their ears. Mechanical laughter filled the air around them as they jerked back around, weapons at the ready. But they were being taunted by a recording. Now 3, they walked forward once more, eyes twitching all over as they looked for some kind of new trap. Then they came to a hall with 3 doors set into the end. They looked at each other, and Mrek took the one to the far left, Taz the middle, and Yearn to the right. Mrek opened his door and sighed as he found a projection wiggling around and howling at him. Taz opened his and found a path beyond. But as Yearn opened his door, a metal spear slammed through his chest, popping open once it was through him. Green blood poured out of the wound as he had time to look at his comrades before the meter spear jerked him back inside and the door slammed shut. Taz and Mrek ran forward. There was just a set of stairs in front of them, and they climbed it, 2 steps at a time, to get some landing where they were faced with a giant face. It stared at them with an unblinking eyes, its mouth open and some sort of lever past the rows of giant fake teeth in what would be its throat. "Do you dare pull the lever to escape the mansion?" cackled the recording, but Taz and Mrek stared at each other. The door next to them looked very solid and heavy, and as they pressed against it briefly, they knew that it wouldn't yield. Sighing out, Mrek set his weapon down, reaching into the mouth. He had to extend his arm all ways until he grabbed the lever, pulling it down. The door opened, but just something snapped onto Mrek's arm. He jerked and pulled, but he couldn't let his arm free. Taz started to move to help him, but then heard the chorus of deathly groans. He heard footsteps, and it sounded like something was walking up the stairs. Then the door opened on the other side, and the landing, and they stood on it, and he saw what looked like a dead humans, missing arms, all pieces of flesh, eyeballs dangling out of the sockets. They were bloody and gory as they seemed to shamble forward. Taz screamed and fired at them, and Mrek having to push flat on his face to avoid the fire. Taz turned and opened the door, running out screaming, as he ignored the fact that the shambling bodies had pieces of metal and wiring exposed after the blasts. "Taz! Taz! They're fake, you idiot! Taz, get back here!" Mrek growled and shook his head. "Stupid coward." He looked back at the fake dead humans and saw the black-skinned one from before, with the white skeleton painted on his flesh. The human was grinning at him, and Mrek screamed. Taz heard the scream, and he ran from the building, out through the old dead garden, and back into the house. As he ran, though, the overgrown weeds something grabbed his foot. He fell forward on the ground with a grunt, and he started to push himself back up, looking back to see what had caught him. Then he saw the hand sticking out from the ground in front of the stone tablet. He had to hold his leg as something started to rise up out of it. Another of those dead humans. He screamed and kicked his leg, forgetting his weapon, and he hopped to his feet and began to run. His lungs burned as he ran, straining his muscles and his joints as he ran faster than he'd ever done before. He could barely see as tears of fear filled his vision while he ran out of the park, surrounded by the cackles and laughter coming from the speakers. Once he was back outside the gate, he ran towards the boat, only to skid to a stop as he saw those dead humans already on it. More were rising up around him, turning and gasping as he was surrounded. He realized now that this wasn't a human trap at all. It was their ghosts, their souls. They demanded revenge. They thirsted for his death. He screamed and cried as he looked around, slowly backing up against the dead humans closed in on him. Then they grabbed his wrists and bodies as he screamed. But the cry was abruptly turned to a gargle as one of the dead humans cut his throat, green blood pouring down his chest. The figure stood around his body, seemingly covered in blood and gore, smeared with dirt and ground that they'd emerged from. They looked around for a moment, then the black human with the white skeleton painted approached. Get the tracking beacon. Yep. Did they mess up the inside? Just the breaking door and the werewolf like usual. We'll reset the traps and then you can deactivate the beacon. Can I have a turn inside the mansion? I'll never get this dirt out of my crack. One of the dead humans said and tried to adjust his pants. The others chuckled. Sorry, not your turn yet. You always say that, damn it. The others chuckled for a moment before getting back to work. They started to move thin and dragging the dead gaznets towards the gate. 2 days later, another team of commandos approached. They crept in under the sign that said, Welcome to Voodoo Island. Green Grasnet blood smeared along the fading sign, with a new skull effigy dangling beneath it. Outside, human figures quietly spread out, starting to dig shallow holes as they waited for the signal to rise up yet again. This time they made sure to leave an opening for one last Grasnet to escape through the swamps. It just wouldn't be long until the Grasnets with sure dead humans were starting to rise up against them, hungering for their flesh. The humans had turned their old superstitions into a weapon against their enemy. But for the Grasnets, it wasn't just a game. It was their deaths, as the humans began to strike terror into their hearts. Earth wasn't dead, it was just rising. End of story. If you enjoyed this story and wish to support the author, the link is down below. If you would like to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so. They will also be listed in the description down below. But the easiest way to help this channel is to share it, subscribe, and like. And, as always, I will see you all in the next video, and I hope that you have a good one. Cheers!